But here's what I like to do. I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's think about your sensibilities and find out if we can come to some common ground on how we can begin to move this from this little room out to all the larger communities and networks we're in. Is that a deal? Who wants to start?
Hello, my name is Lena, and my question will be related to technological unemployment.
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
We are moving to an automated world. There's no doubt about it. However, as I said during the talk, we've got 2 generations of massive employment. That's clear to lay out this infrastructure. That's going to require millions and millions of jobs. We know this on the ground as we're laying this out in Europe right now. It's a huge amount of jobs. Robots can't do it. AI can't do it. This is infrastructure shift. However, as this smart digital economy and society moves in, it can be run by very small supervisory workforces with analytics, big data, algorithms, and apps. That's why we call it smart world, smart society, smart economy. Then what do we do once we have the smart society in and it's automated, running by analytics? We're not going to pay people just to do nothing. We already know where the employment's going. And that is, as we continue to automate the market economy, employment's shifting to the nonprofit social economy and the sharing economy. We already know that. The nonprofit sector is the fastest growing employment sector right now in the world. It's about 9.5, 10% of the American employment, paid employment's in nonprofit. Why is it heading there? Because in the social economy, the nonprofit economy, and large sections of the sharing economy, social capital is as important as market capital. And in this realm, the nonprofit realm, the social economy, the sharing economy, it requires human beings. Engage with other human beings. Machines are only supplemental. We will never have a robot raising a child and interacting with them in a child care center to develop their brain. It's never going to happen. They may bring the lunch to the kid, the robot, but it's going to require human beings working with those children. And whether it's in parts of healthcare, in the knowledge industries, in cultural areas, humans with humans. The only other question is, how does this sector survive financially? Johns Hopkins University does a study of nonprofits in 40 countries every few years, and guess what they found? Over half the income for nonprofits, which are one of the biggest employers now, comes from fees for services. If you're doing health research, you set up a health clinic. You get fees for services, and then you can continue to do your nonprofit research. If we get any of this transition right, we automate the market, we move to social capital, where we can use our minds much more expansively so we can learn to live as a human family and steward each other, steward our fellow creatures, steward the earth. That's a much more noble mission.
I believe that in order to create a better tomorrow, we also need to look at rehabilitating our psychology.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. And I have to say, our academic disciplines, they're going to step on more toes. The academic disciplines in our school systems are so moribund. It's dysfunctional. We have an internet generation that lives one way of life in terms of their mind outside the classroom and another inside the classroom. In the classroom, for example, when we think about education, the first thing we realize is the classroom looks a little bit like a factory. These big, giant institutions. And the kid comes in there in first grade, a little boy or girl, and they immediately realize there's a central authority, the teacher. They have to be silent. If they share knowledge with each other, it's called cheating, and they're expelled. And they learn that their mission is to be efficient, but only in the sense of being able to have the skills they need to follow orders and tend the machinery of the Industrial Revolution. Yet, an internet generation out of school, you're all sharing knowledge. The whole point of the internet is to share your talents and skills, open source, no intellectual property, and begin to crowdsource the knowledge of the world together. That is so different than what you're getting in school. So let me say one thing about this. You know what we're doing in northern industrial France? All 7 universities have come together in 200 high schools, and the universities are led by Catholic University of Lille. Here's what they've done. All faculty now teach interdisciplinary so that you learn various perspectives, and there's more than one way to look at things, and you have to share a common language. No silos. Secondly, all the students now are put into modules in teams, and they work with their teams, and the students have to teach each other. The teacher becomes a facilitator and a guide, but the students have to teach each other. And if they share knowledge, it's good. It's not cheating. Then they learn that knowledge is not power and something one possesses at the expense of the other. Knowledge is the shared experience you have as a social being. And the learning now is clinical. What's the good of learning if theory isn't brought together with practice? So their learning is clinical. They've taken service learning, which you all did here, and they've elevated to pedagogy. So whatever you're learning, you have to apply it with your fellow citizens in the neighborhoods where these universities are. How do you like that? Catholic University of Lille. That's the revolution.
I believe in the Darwinian theory of humanity being more Darwinian than utopian. What would you do about basically corruption and fraud?
Let me be very clear. I am an anti-utopian. If you read my books, I don't believe in utopias. I don't like utopias. I think utopias are dangerous. Our human spirit, the empathic spirit, is designed to show compassion to our frailties, our precarious existence. An empathic world is never a utopian world. Utopias are worlds that are perfect. There's no mortality, there's no pain, there's no suffering, and every moment is perfect. There's no such world. I look through history and I see that the most civilized societies are the ones that can move empathy to larger reigns. And there's a history of that, of empathy. So I like an empathic world where we understand each other's frailties. We show compassion with each other's desires to flourish. We reach out to each other, and we do this every day. And when someone that we know is in joy or pain or suffering, we do this with our fellow creatures that are in trouble. It's the empathy that runs day-to-day life, not utopias. And I think George Frederick Hegel got it right. He wrote a little passage that I read 40 years ago. He said, happiness are the blank pages of history because they are the periods of harmony. I thought, what does that mean? Over and over, I kept thinking of it. Well, he's right, because when you read historians and you read their view of history, you think we're pretty pathological creatures, because historians always chronicle the mayhem, the genocides, the wars, the redress of social grievances, because those moments are extraordinary, not ordinary. They imprint a stamp on us. They move us to fright and flight because they're so extraordinary, they're remembered for generations. But when you then chronicle all of history as if it's a series of these very, very dysfunctional episodes in life, you get a pretty dire picture of the human race, correct? Happiness are the blank periods of history where most of us, as we evolve our empathic concern to larger social units, our day-to-day life is reaching out to each other in some ways to help, to show our concern, to provide our compassion. It's not the few. We do this as the multitudes. I'll give you an example. Cooperatives. You never hear about cooperatives in business school. There are banking cooperatives and housing cooperatives and agricultural cooperatives and construction cooperatives. In some countries, they're the largest banks. They're the social housing. It's never mentioned in business school because it's a different form. It's people coming together and sharing their destiny. This is the true sharing economy, cooperatives, and that's why they're the engine, the vehicle for the new sharing economy. But they're never mentioned. Societies that are able to nurture the empathic sensitivities that are in our neural circuitry are the ones that don't have to worry as much about the secondary drives, which are brutality and corruption and all the bad things that go with it. So I have a little bit better picture in my mind of the evolution of the human race. What I'm suggesting is the next stage is biosphere consciousness. As we begin to see climate change impacting our entire community, and there's nowhere to escape, we begin to realize we're part of that community. And so we're getting a younger generation that's beginning to empathize with our fellow human beings and our fellow creatures in one biosphere. This is a hopeful narrative of the human race with all the dark periods in between. So I hope you leave with that message. At least I believe that the history of the human race is to overcome and to transcend ourselves and to empathize in larger social units until we see ourselves as part of one life force on the planet.
I'm Tony. I think you might be coming up against something with these new corporate agreements that they want to foist on us, TPP, TIPS, and so on. But they do seem to contain provisions that would put corporations at an advantage over governments, over elected governments.
Well, let me give you a counterpost. There's another kind of agreement emerging with very different politics. President Xi and Premier Li introduced an idea called Belt One Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a very different initiative because here's the U.S. trying to isolate, if it will, China with its Pacific agreements, corporate-led. And the Belt Road Initiative is the idea of resurrecting the old Silk Road from Shanghai to Rotterdam. But it requires a different sensibility. Originally, it was designed just to get a railroad across the hinterlands, crossing the stands all the way into Europe and a Mediterranean route around the southern edge and to Italy. But then it quickly escalated to a conversation, wait a minute, Europe's doing Digital Europe, the Internet of Things platform, Third Industrial Revolution, and that it not only will be in the EU, but our partnership regions in the Mediterranean. That's a billion people market. 500 million in the Union, 500 million in our partnership regions in the Mediterranean, North Africa. China has a similar plan that we've worked with them. It's identical, called China Internet Plus. So the conversation quickly led to, well, wait a minute. Europe is China's largest trading partner. China is Europe's second largest trading partner. How about a Belt Road Initiative from Shanghai to Rotterdam? That's now in deep conversation, but it requires a different sensibility. No one can control the Internet of Things platforms centrally because it's designed to be distributed. That's the resiliency of the system. And so that if any one power, any nation across the region, is going to try to control it from the top, you can't do it because you can go off-grid. And I think all the parties are aware of this. And in my dealings in Beijing and Brussels and Berlin, they're aware that this is a new partnership. It requires collaboration. You got to share best practices. You got to share the science and technology. You got to get over the suspicion. Everyone benefits in the network. It's not geopolitics. It isn't we control, we close, and then we overpower you. It doesn't work in an Internet of Things world. You have to have it borderless. It has to be open. It has to allow you to have a distributed ability to go off and on when you want and have blockchains. So I think this Belt Road Initiative is quite interesting because it may not just be for Eurasia. This may be a vision that would be for a millennial generation, a vision that could move from the Americas, from Canada and the United States down to Chile. And then you have really a distributed biosphere infrastructure revolution, not a traditional geopolitical revolution. And therefore, it requires everyone to be involved because everyone's a player.
My name's Danielle. How do you see your vision and what you've been talking about affecting large food systems in industrialized countries as well as developing countries?
You know how much energy the agricultural system uses? About a third of their cost are energy costs. The fertilizers, those are fossil fuels. The pesticides, those are fossil fuels. The machinery, it's all run by fossil fuels. The packaging, the plastics, it's made out of fossil fuels. The water that they have to bring in and irrigate, the electricity grids run by fossil fuel and nuclear power to move the water. So if you want to take a look at agriculture, it is a huge player. Not only that, the fertilizers emit nitrous oxides, which are much more potent in terms of their impact than CO2. You know that 40%, I believe it is, of the land that's used for agriculture in the world today is to grow feed for animals. It takes at least 8 pounds of feed to create 1 pound of beef. That makes the transport industry look like super efficient. It's the most inefficient system we know on the food chain. If you look at pure injustice, you'd have to say the shift to a feed grain animal culture and a chemical farming culture for pasturing animals is one of the great injustices in the history of the world. Some of us live high up on the chain, the rest are denied access to the land. We got to turn that around. So in Europe, we are interested in organic agriculture. We're interested in moving from pesticides and chemical agriculture to ecological agriculture where we learn to live with the surrounding flora and fauna, and we find ways to encourage the flora and fauna to be able to be compatible with what we're growing. In the old chemical world, if it moves, kill it. Everything surrounding your crop should be killed. So we live in a chemical wasteland across the agricultural fields with runoff poisoning our water. It's how shameful. So we want to move to organic agriculture. We had mechanical agriculture in the first industrial revolution. It started in late first industrial revolution. We had chemical agriculture in the second industrial revolution. We need to have smart, organic, ecological agriculture in the third industrial revolution. And we have to bring back regional and local agriculture that supports local communities. It's absurd to ship a tomato around the world. Ridiculous.
Hi, I'm Rochelle. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about water and how water plays into this decentralized vision, how the privatization of water plays out. I was just hoping you could speak to that.
There's only a small amount of water on this planet that's available for human use, less than 1%. The rest is not available. There is a deep nexus between energy and water that's never explained. You have to have energy to move water. And that is that 8% of all the energy we generate in the world, power, goes to extracting water, treating water, moving it through pipelines in water, and recycling the waste. But you need water to move energy. This isn't well known. And that is the energy industry uses over half of all the water we use goes to the power industries, of all industries, over half. And this will surprise you. In France, which is 80% nuclear power, you know how much of the water they use for cooling the nuclear reactors in France? Almost 50% of all the fresh water consumed in France goes to cooling the nuclear reactors. Yeah. And when the water comes back, it's heated. So it's dehydrating ecosystems that are already facing drought for their agriculture. And now sometimes the water is so hot because of climate change in the summer, they can't even use it to cool the nuclear reactors, and they have to slow down the electricity. So what's the nexus? We have to begin to create a new plan so that people get control over their water in a distributed system that brings water together with energy. And I'll give you an example of why. If the electricity grid is disrupted, let's say one of the transformers, big electricity transformers, either through cybercrime, cyber terrorism, or natural disaster, goes down, and your power goes down. There's no water. We're dead in 3 weeks. That's how vulnerable the system. That's why we have to build in resilience by keeping it so distributed. So what do? I'm in Haute, France a couple of weeks ago. This little startup, they've taken a whole social housing complex, huge housing complex. They took the whole roof and turned it into a cistern. Why did they do that? Because the water falls, and as it falls, it generates electricity in a turbine. So they're using it for electricity, but now we're saying use it as a cistern. So if the power grid goes out and you can't get water, you're dead in a couple of weeks. You have the water right built in to your home, office, and factory on the roofs or nearby. You can share it in a cooperative. And then that water can be used potable for fresh water. And then we're now talking with companies about, and with housing, that you can take the water, use it for your toilet water, and you will be able to recycle it right back on site. So you can go distributed and decentralized when the real power grid goes out. The key to maintaining this system is it's distributed. If anything happens in one part of the system, you can go off, both distributed and decentralized, and share your water, share your energy. So water and energy go together, and you've just hit, and I'm glad you said this, something that has really come to the top of the agenda for us now. How do we create a distributed water internet to go side by side with the energy internet? Very cool thinking.
My name's Elizabeth, and I just have a question for underdeveloped countries. How do they play a part in this whole third industrial revolution? Can they sort of skip the gun because they don't have an established infrastructure?
Yeah, you just answered the question I was about to answer. Very good. Well, here's what we realized, just what you said. What we finally realized is in the developing world, their liability is their key asset. Their liability is they have no infrastructure. That's their asset. Because it's easier to build version infrastructure with new codes and regulations from scratch than to take an old infrastructure with old codes and regulations and transform it. So what we're learning in the developing world is this can move more quickly. We saw the opportunity that the developing world can leapfrog right past the first and second industrial revolution into the third. So the United Nations has now embraced the third industrial revolution narrative that we've just talked about tonight. The biggest problem in the developing world, no electricity. Ban Ki-moon has made this his pledge, universal electricity. We got 1 billion people that have no electricity. They're in the dark. We have 40% of the human race with infrequent, not reliable electricity. And what keeps women enslaved in this world is no electricity. And what we see with these big families and these patriarchal, brutal conditions and male-oriented cultures, no electricity. Why? Because with no electricity, women are the slaves, the children are the slaves. More children, more hands on deck that can actually carry the energy load. We forget the relationship between electricity and freeing women in the West. Women were the slaves at the hearth until electricity came in. Electricity freed women from that slavery, if you will, to go to school beyond the first 5 grades. And then electricity created new skills that didn't require upper body strength, but up here. Electricity revolution created all sorts of new skills. And when that happened, as women became more educated and more independent and had the new skills of the second industrial revolution, fewer babies. You can give out millions of condoms. It'll make no difference until you bring electricity into the developing world, free the women, have them get educated, and have them be recognized as half the human race. And what's interesting is the women are setting up these microgrids, a lot of it. So you see in rural Africa, they go into a village, it's happening in India too, and small startups, they come in, they lease a solar panel on each roof. They give you a lease. And then they give you a cell phone. This is happening all across rural India and now sub-Saharan Africa. But instead of a big centralized grid, then you go village to village to village and you create microgrids that are laterally scaled. This is going to take off very, very quickly. It already is. This is the smart social entrepreneurs of the next generation. This is why I'm really pleased to see this happen. It brings confidence that we can do better.
I'm Ray, and I've been thinking during your whole talk about how do we overcome monopoly?
We have to worry about a new kind of monopoly. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I love Google. It is the magic box. I'm now so lazy that anything that comes up, especially at my age, I ask the magic box. It is a great research engine. However, when everybody needs Google, and it's the only research engine, and it's our window to the research we need, it starts to look like a global monopoly, and it starts to look like a public utility. What did we do with successful businesses that had a product line that was so important that everybody needed it and it was a public good? What did we do in the second industrial revolution with the telephone industry? We, in America, in other parts of the world, we government took over a lot of it. But in America, we kept them in the private sphere, like AT&T, but we regulated them as utilities. And we did this across the electricity utilities, many of the power utilities, we regulated them. I think it's naive to believe that we won't do this. The millennials and your children, this is the new political movement. You're going to be asking the question, how do we get the best out of these new enterprises? But they have to be regulated as public goods in the realm so that we all ensure that we get equal access, that we have some control over our creative content and data, maybe through blockchains, and that we're able to secure our privacy, etc. Facebook, same thing. When the whole human family has to come together on Facebook to communicate with each other, it's a great service, but it looks like a public good. It's a utility. And we're going to have some kind of global authorities to regulate them. Does this make sense? This is the politics of your generation. This is the politics of the new third industrial revolution.
Hi, I'm Carlin. In the words of your Wharton alumni, how do we make America great again?
Let me say something to take this from another corner. President Obama wanted a green economy. He spent billions and billions of dollars of our tax money for a green economy, and we don't have a green economy. Why did this happen? Because the mentality here in this country is all we need to do is use tax money to incentivize, because we want 1 million Steve Jobs. So what happened with President Obama is he would incentivize, give some money to a solar factory here, a battery factory over there, incentivize. But you can't start with that. You have to start with incentivizing the infrastructure itself, which requires everybody coming together. Now, he made a very famous statement during his second presidential campaign, which got to the heart of it. You may recall that he was speaking to small businesses, and he made an offhanded comment saying, "You didn't build that." Remember this comment? It went viral. "You didn't build that." And they went nuts. He was referring to infrastructure, and he was trying to say the infrastructure comes first, then you can create your new businesses with it. The problem is they went viral because the small business said, "No, we create America. It's the entrepreneurial spirit." We've actually so dummied down our country that we actually have no idea how businesses feed off the infrastructure that come from public-private partnerships, government, industry, and civil society. Who do they think created the public school systems so that we could train the workforces? Private businesses didn't do that. Who laid out the interstate highways with tax money? You think private businesses will lay out an interstate highway system with no lights from coast to coast? Who underwrote all the pipelines that had to bring in the electricity, the gas and the telephone industry, on and on and on? In fact, let's look at Steve Jobs. The fact is that most of the research that went into his smartphone was government-funded research. He marketed the product. But we've so dummied down that half the country or more doesn't want the government to do anything. They don't even want the government. This is the failure of the United States. We do not have a social market economy. Europe does. Other parts of the world do. But in America, we have this whole idea that it's just the entrepreneurial spirit, let the companies rule, let the marketplace reign. This is our death knell. Because if we can't work together in each county and each state with business, civil society, academia to lay out this platform and create the regulations, codes, and standards, then the new businesses come, then the new models plug in. So what I'm saying is, look to the infrastructure, and your millennial generation, it's up to you now to bring this sense of a social market economy back into the dialogue. We need government, we need business, we need the civil society, we need public capital, we need private capital, and we need social capital. All three equal players at the table.